A wealthy woman insults a waitress but freezes when she sees who owns the restaurant. In the heart of the city, where elegance meets exclusivity, a wealthy socialite steps into one of the most prestigious restaurants, her head held high and her demands even higher. She expects nothing less than perfection, accustomed to the world bending to her will. But tonight, as she belittles a humble waitress with cutting remarks and an air of superiority, she unknowingly sets the stage for a twist she never saw coming. What happens when the person she dismisses as beneath her is revealed to hold all the power? The answer will challenge everything you think you know about respect, privilege, and karma. Before we begin, where are you watching from today? Let us know in the comments. If you love inspiring stories of resilience and justice, make sure to hit that like button, share this video, and subscribe for more incredible tales. Your support helps us share these impactful stories with even more people. Now let's get into it. Olivia Vanderbilt's stilettos clicked sharply against the polished marble floor of Label Maison, the sound echoing like a declaration of her presence. Heads turned, as they always did when Olivia entered a room. Her designer dress, deep emerald green with gold accents, hugged her frame perfectly, a testament to her refined taste and endless bank account. The hostess, a young woman no older than 20, straightened nervously behind the podium. Olivia smiled, a carefully practiced expression designed to convey both charm and superiority. Reservation for Vanderbilt. I trust you've prepared the private dining area I requested? The hostess hesitated, her fingers skimming the reservation book. Yes, ma'am. It's ready. Right this way. Olivia's friends, equally polished and adorned in the latest couture, trailed behind her like a well-dressed entourage. They murmured in hushed tones, glancing around the restaurant's opulent interior. Crystal chandeliers hung low, casting a warm, golden glow on the tables below. The aroma of truffle oil and aged wine wafted through the air, mingling with the soft hum of classical music. Is it always this dark in here? Olivia asked, her tone cutting through the ambience like a shard of ice. How do people even see their food? The hostess flushed, but said nothing, leading Olivia and her party to their table. They were seated near the grand piano, where a pianist played a delicate rendition of Debussy's Clair de Lune. Olivia barely glanced at him as she took her seat at the head of the table, the unofficial throne. Finally, Olivia sighed, flicking her hair over one shoulder. I thought we'd be waiting all night. It was Isabella Rossi who approached the table, her steps measured, her posture graceful. She wore the restaurant's signature uniform, a crisp black blouse paired with tailored pants, but there was an air of authority about her that seemed to transcend her attire. Her dark curls were pulled into a sleek bun, and her eyes sparkled with warmth as she greeted the group. Good evening, ladies, Isabella said with a polite smile. Welcome to Label Maison. My name is Isabella, and I'll be your server tonight. Can I start you off with something to drink? Perhaps a bottle of our house reserve champagne? Olivia looked Isabella up and down, her eyes narrowing slightly, as if assessing whether the woman was worthy of serving her. Water, she said curtly. No ice. And make sure it's mineral, not tap. Of course, Isabella replied smoothly, her smile unwavering. And for the rest of the table? As the other women placed their drink orders, Olivia leaned back in her chair, tapping her manicured nails on the tablecloth. This place better live up to the hype, she muttered loud enough for Isabella to hear. I've been to enough mediocre restaurants masquerading as fine dining. I'd hate to add this one to the list. Isabella didn't flinch. We'll do our best to exceed your expectations, ma'am, she said evenly, before retreating to fulfill the orders. Did you see her nails? Olivia whispered to her friend Chloe as soon as Isabella was out of earshot. Chipped polish. I thought this place had standards. Chloe giggled, covering her mouth with a manicured hand. Well, it's not like everyone can afford bi-weekly appointments at LeBlanc. Olivia smirked. Exactly. But if you're going to work in a place like this, at least try to look the part. The drinks arrived swiftly, Isabella balancing the tray with practiced ease. As she placed the mineral water in front of Olivia, the glass slipped slightly, causing a drop of condensation to land on the pristine white tablecloth. Olivia's eyes snapped to the spot, as if Isabella had spilled an entire pitcher. Careful, she hissed. Do you know how much this dress costs? More than your entire month's salary, I'm sure. Isabella paused, her expression unreadable. I do apologize, ma'am. Let me grab a fresh napkin. You should grab a new career while you're at it, Olivia muttered under her breath. The comment wasn't quiet enough. Several diners nearby glanced at Olivia's table, their eyes lingering on Isabella as she walked away, her back straight and her head high. The pianist faltered briefly, missing a note before resuming his piece. As the night progressed, Olivia's comments became sharper, her laughter louder, her criticisms more pointed. She complained about the texture of the bread, the temperature of the soup, and the mediocre wine selection, though she had chosen the bottle herself. Isabella returned to the table each time with the same calm demeanor, addressing Olivia's concerns with professionalism. But there were moments, fleeting, almost imperceptible, when her poised mask seemed to slip, a flash of frustration in her eyes, a slight tightening of her jaw. "Do you even know what you're doing?" Olivia snapped at one point. "Or is this your first week on the job?" "I assure you, ma'am, I'm quite experienced," Isabella replied, her voice steady but firm. "If there's anything specific you'd like corrected, please let me know." Olivia leaned back, her smile brittle. "Just stay out of the way and try not to ruin the evening." Unbeknownst to Olivia, her behavior hadn't gone unnoticed. Across the room, a group of well-dressed individuals watched the interaction with growing disapproval. Among them was a man with salt and pepper hair and an air of quiet authority. He leaned over to whisper to the woman beside him, who nodded and glanced toward Isabella with a look of concern. The man's name was David Sterling, a frequent guest at Label Maison and one of Isabella's closest confidants. Though he remained silent for now, his presence would soon shift the balance of power in the room. Olivia's laughter rang out across the dining room, sharp and mirthless, as if she were a queen addressing her court. She leaned toward Chloe, her diamond bracelet catching the light, and whispered something that sent her entourage into a ripple of smug chuckles. At the center of the opulent dining room, Olivia's table was now the unspoken stage, her antics drawing attention from diners who exchanged uneasy glances. Isabella Rossi returned to the table with a practiced smile, her composure unbroken despite the mounting tension. She carried a tray of the appetizers Olivia had ordered, setting each dish before the women with careful precision. "These are the oysters Rockefeller you requested," Isabella said, her voice calm and professional, prepared with locally sourced ingredients. Olivia peered down at the plate, her perfectly arched brow lifting as though the dish itself had offended her. "Locally sourced," she repeated, the disdain dripping from her tone. "Do I look like someone who eats food from a backyard garden?" Chloe snorted into her glass of wine, and Olivia gave Isabella a once-over, her gaze lingering on the name tag pinned to her blouse. "Isabella, was it?" Olivia drawled, deliberately mispronouncing it. "If I wanted farm-to-table, I'd eat at a food truck." "Try again." A flicker of something, anger perhaps, passed over Isabella's face, but it was gone so quickly that even Olivia might have doubted she saw it. "I'll inform the kitchen of your concerns, ma'am," Isabella said evenly, her hands clasped in front of her. "In the meantime, I recommend the scallop tartare. It's a house specialty." Olivia waved a hand dismissively. "I don't need your recommendations, Isabella. Just bring me something that isn't this." She gestured vaguely at the plate of untouched oysters, her lips curling in distaste. Isabella returned to the kitchen, her steps slower this time, as if each one required effort. She could feel the eyes of other diners on her back, some filled with sympathy, others with curiosity. It wasn't the first time she had dealt with a difficult customer, but something about Olivia's behavior was particularly grating. Not because it was new, but because it was so familiar. "Table 7 giving you trouble?" asked Marcus, the sous chef, as Isabella stepped into the bustling kitchen. He was plating a delicate arrangement of sea bass, his hands moving with the precision of a surgeon. Isabella let out a soft sigh, leaning against the counter. "The woman at table 7, she said carefully, is testing the limits of how far she can push me." Marcus smirked without looking up. "You've got more patience than anyone I know. I'd have lost it by now." Isabella didn't respond. Instead, she straightened her spine and picked up the next tray. Losing her composure wasn't an option. Not here, not now. Back at the table, Olivia's irritation had shifted into a kind of gleeful superiority. She reveled in the discomfort of those around her, mistaking their silence for admiration. The wine had softened her edges but sharpened her tongue, and she leaned back in her chair with the air of someone who believed herself untouchable. "Can you believe this place is supposed to be exclusive?" Olivia said, her voice carrying across the room. "If this is their idea of fine dining, they should just stick to catering weddings." Chloe giggled, covering her mouth with her hand. Maybe we should call Gordon Ramsay and let him sort them out. The women erupted into laughter, oblivious to the growing tension in the room. Across the restaurant, David Sterling set his glass down with deliberate care. His dark eyes flicked toward Olivia's table, then back to Isabella, who had just emerged from the kitchen with another tray. "She's handling this well," David murmured to his companion, a woman in an elegant navy suit. "Better than most would." The woman nodded, her expression unreadable. "She always does." Isabella approached the table with quiet determination, setting down a new dish in front of Olivia. "This is our scallop tartare," she said, her voice calm and measured. "Prepared with a citrus reduction and garnished with edible gold leaf." Olivia tilted her head, inspecting the dish as though it were an alien artifact. "Edible gold leaf?" she said, her tone mocking. "How quaint. Is this your way of trying to impress me?" Isabella didn't rise to the bait. "It's a signature dish, ma'am. I hope it meets your expectations." Olivia picked up her fork, swirling it lazily through the tartare without taking a bite. Then, as if on a whim, she dropped the fork onto the plate with a loud clatter. "Do you call this fine dining?" she demanded, her voice rising. "I've had better meals at airport lounges." The room fell silent. All eyes were on Isabella, who stood frozen for a moment before nodding slightly. "I'm sorry to hear that, ma'am," she said quietly. "I'll have the kitchen prepare something else." But before Isabella could turn away, Olivia's voice cut through the silence like a knife. "You know, maybe you should stick to what you're good at. Cleaning tables. Serving people like me." The words hung in the air, heavy and undeniable. Olivia smiled, clearly pleased with herself, while Chloe looked away, suddenly finding her wine glass very interesting. Isabella stood still, her expression carefully neutral. For a moment, she said nothing, letting the silence speak louder than any words could. Then, with a slow, deliberate breath, she straightened her shoulders and looked Olivia directly in the eyes. "Enjoy your meal, ma'am," Isabella said, her voice steady and clear. She turned and walked away, her back straight and her steps unhurried. The tension in the room crackled like static, every diner holding their breath, waiting for what would happen next. At her table, Olivia smirked, raising her glass of wine in a mock toast. "Here's to good service," she said, her voice dripping with sarcasm. But for the first time that evening, the applause didn't come from her entourage. It came from the shadows, where David Sterling stood, his expression dark and unreadable. The storm was coming, and Olivia had no idea. Isabella walked briskly toward the back of the restaurant, her head held high, but her heart pounding in her chest. The words Olivia had hurled at her clung to the air like smoke, suffocating and sharp. It wasn't the first time someone had tried to diminish her, but that didn't make it sting any less. She reached the small alcove near the kitchen where the staff often gathered between orders. Taking a deep breath, she leaned against the wall, her hands resting on her knees. The soft hum of the kitchen buzzed in the background, a comforting rhythm amidst the chaos of her emotions. "You all right?" Marcus's voice broke through her thoughts. He stood a few feet away, his apron streaked with sauce, concern etched on his face. Isabella nodded, offering a small, tight smile. "I'm fine," she said, though the crack in her voice betrayed her. "Just another entitled customer thinking they can talk to people however they want." Marcus crossed his arms, leaning against the counter. "That table? The one with the wannabe queen." His tone was low, but his annoyance was evident. Isabella sighed, brushing a hand through the loose strands of her hair. "Yeah, it's fine. She doesn't know who I am, and honestly, I don't care to explain." "You sure about that?" Marcus asked, raising an eyebrow. "Because David Sterling just walked out of here looking like he's about to lay down the law." Back in the dining room, David Sterling moved with the quiet authority of someone used to being in control. At 6 feet tall, with salt and pepper hair and a tailored navy suit, he had an air of effortless sophistication that commanded respect. Without a word, he approached Olivia's table, his steps measured and deliberate. The pianist faltered once more, sensing the tension that now radiated through the room. Olivia didn't notice him at first, too busy regaling her companions with yet another anecdote about her most recent spa retreat. "It's hard to find good help these days," she was saying, swirling her wine glass in lazy circles. "I mean, really, what's the point of hiring people if they don't even—" "Excuse me," David interrupted, his voice calm but firm. He stood just behind Isabella's vacant place at the table, his dark eyes fixed on Olivia. Olivia blinked, startled by the intrusion. "Can I help you?" she asked, her tone defensive, her posture stiffening. David smiled faintly, the kind of smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "I couldn't help but overhear your observations about the staff here at Label Maison." Olivia tilted her head, her lips curving into a condescending smirk. "Well, if you're the manager, I suggest you train your staff better. That woman, Isabella, or whatever her name is, needs a lesson in how to treat paying customers." David chuckled softly, the sound low and almost amused. "Actually, I'm not the manager," he said, his gaze steady. "I'm a close friend of the owner, and you just insulted one of the finest individuals I've ever had the privilege of knowing." The smirk vanished from Olivia's face, replaced by a flicker of confusion. "The owner," she repeated, her voice faltering slightly. "I thought this was what are you talking about?" David leaned forward slightly, lowering his voice just enough that only Olivia and her entourage could hear. "Isabella Rossi. She doesn't just work here. She owns this restaurant. Every chair, every glass, every fork you've so casually dismissed, all hers." Olivia's eyes widened, her perfectly curated facade beginning to crack. "That's impossible," she stammered. "She's just a waitress." David straightened, his expression unreadable. "She's more than that. She's a visionary. This restaurant, her dream, is now a reality. And she didn't get here by belittling people or throwing her wealth around." Chloe shifted uncomfortably in her seat, her gaze darting between Olivia and David. "Maybe we should." "No." Olivia snapped, her voice tight with indignation. "This is ridiculous. If she's the owner, why is she waiting tables? That doesn't make sense." David smiled again, this time with a hint of steel beneath his charm. "Because Isabella believes in understanding every aspect of her business. She built this place from the ground up. Serving her guests, even difficult ones, is her way of staying connected to her vision." Olivia opened her mouth to respond, but no words came out. The weight of the revelation settled over her like a heavy blanket, suffocating and inescapable. Isabella emerged from the back of the restaurant, her shoulders squared, her composure fully restored. The staff parted for her as she made her way toward Olivia's table, her steps steady and deliberate. She didn't look at David, though his presence beside the table gave her a quiet strength. "Is everything all right here?" Isabella asked, her voice calm but firm. Her gaze flicked briefly to Olivia, then to the half-empty wine glass on the table. Olivia sat frozen, her cheeks flushing a deep crimson. She avoided Isabella's eyes, her hands twisting the napkin in her lap. David glanced at Isabella, then stepped aside, giving her the stage. This was her moment. "Ms. Vanderbilt," Isabella began, her tone measured, "I understand you've had some concerns about your experience tonight. I'd like to address them directly." Olivia looked up, her jaw tightening. "I know. It's fine. Everything's fine." Isabella tilted her head, her expression unreadable. "Are you sure? Because earlier, you seemed to have quite a few opinions about my restaurant. And about me." Olivia's mouth opened, then closed again. She glanced at her friends, but none of them met her gaze. "Well," Isabella continued, her voice softening just slightly, "I hope you'll find the rest of your evening satisfactory. But if you'd prefer, I can have your meals packaged to go." Olivia's face drained of color. "That's not necessary," she mumbled. "Very well," Isabella said, stepping back. "If you need anything else, please let me know." As she walked away, the room erupted into quiet applause, a ripple of approval that spread like wildfire. Olivia's cheeks burned as she realized the entire restaurant had been watching and judging. The balance of power had shifted, and Olivia Vanderbilt was no longer the queen of the room. Olivia sat rigid in her chair, the ambient noise of the restaurant now a dull hum against the pounding in her ears. Her friends, once eager participants in her ridicule, were suddenly preoccupied with their plates or the folds of their napkins. Chloe gave a half-hearted laugh, trying to lighten the mood. "Well," she said weakly, "at least the wine is good." Olivia shot her a sharp look, but said nothing. Her fingers gripped the edge of the tablecloth, her knuckles white, as she replayed David's words in her head. "She owns this restaurant." The sentence echoed like a haunting refrain, each repetition chipping away at her carefully crafted facade of superiority. Across the room, Isabella stood near the maitre d's podium, her calm demeanor intact. She greeted a new party of guests with the same warmth and professionalism she had shown all evening. But beneath the surface, her mind worried with thoughts of the confrontation. She didn't enjoy scenes like this, not the humiliation of another person, not the public vindication. It wasn't her style. Yet tonight had been different. The years of microaggressions and casual disrespect, the countless instances of people assuming her value based on her appearance, had made this moment unavoidable. From the corner of her eye, Isabella noticed David watching her. He gave her a small nod, a silent acknowledgement of her composure. She nodded back, grateful for his steady presence. Olivia couldn't bring herself to touch the scalloped tartare in front of her. The golden garnish mocked her, its opulence a stark reminder of the power she no longer held in the room. The whispers from nearby tables reached her ears, hushed but unmistakable. "Isn't that the woman who, she's the one who insulted the owner? Can you believe it?" Olivia's cheeks burned, her mind racing to find a way to salvage the situation. She reached for her wine glass, taking a long sip as if the liquid could dissolve the weight of the stairs. But no amount of vintage Merlot could mask the truth. She had crossed a line, and now everyone knew it. Just as Olivia leaned back in her chair, attempting to regain some semblance of control, Isabella approached the table again. This time, she wasn't carrying plates or glasses. Her presence alone was enough to command the room's attention. "Ms. Vanderbilt," Isabella began, her voice steady but carrying a weight that silenced even the faint clinking of cutlery nearby. "I wanted to ensure everything at your table is to your satisfaction now." Olivia blinked, caught off guard. Yes, everything's fine." Isabella smiled politely, but there was no warmth in it. "Good. Because at Label Maison, we pride ourselves on creating a welcoming environment for all our guests and our staff." Olivia stiffened, her pride refusing to let her fully acknowledge the veiled reprimand. "Of course," she said quickly, forcing a smile. "I think there was just a misunderstanding earlier." Isabella's eyes held hers, unflinching. "Misunderstandings happen," she replied, her voice cool. "But respect should never be optional. I trust that's something we can agree on." Olivia's throat tightened. The words stung more than she expected, not because of their sharpness, but because of the truth they carried. She nodded stiffly, her usual confidence stripped away. "Yes, of course." As Isabella turned to leave, David stepped forward, his presence filling the space like a quiet storm. He placed a hand on Isabella's shoulder, his voice low but firm. "Excuse me, Isabella, if I may." Isabella glanced at him, then stepped aside, letting him take the lead. David faced Olivia, his expression unreadable. "Ms. Vanderbilt," he said evenly. "On behalf of the owner, I think it's best that we conclude your evening here." Olivia's eyes widened. "You're asking me to leave?" David's gaze didn't waver. "Not asking. Insisting." Olivia's lips parted, but no words came out. Around her, the other diners had fallen silent, their attention fixed on the unfolding drama. Chloe reached out, touching Olivia's arm lightly. "Maybe we should just go," she whispered, her voice barely audible. Olivia's pride flared, but the weight of the moment crushed it. She stood abruptly, her chair scraping against the floor. "Fine," she snapped, grabbing her designer clutch. "Let's go." The journey from the table to the exit felt like an eternity. Each step was a reminder of her diminished stature, every pair of eyes, a mirror reflecting her humiliation. Isabella stood by the podium, her expression composed but resolute as Olivia and her entourage passed. Olivia paused briefly, her hand tightening around the strap of her clutch. She looked at Isabella as if searching for something: pity, understanding, forgiveness. But Isabella offered none of these. She simply nodded, her gaze steady. "Have a good evening, Ms. Vanderbilt," Isabella said, her tone neutral. Olivia said nothing, her face a mask of barely concealed rage and embarrassment. She pushed open the heavy glass doors, the sound of her stilettos fading into the night. As the doors closed behind Olivia, the tension in the restaurant lifted like a veil. Conversations resumed, the pianist's music flowed seamlessly once more, and the atmosphere returned to its usual elegance. Isabella let out a soft breath, her shoulders relaxing for the first time that evening. David approached her, a small smile playing on his lips. "Handled that well." Isabella shook her head, a faint smile of her own appearing. "Not exactly the kind of evening I planned." "No," David said, his tone thoughtful. "But sometimes moments like this remind people what you stand for. And tonight, you reminded everyone that respect isn't negotiable." Isabella glanced toward the empty table where Olivia had sat. For a moment, she felt a pang of sadness. not for Olivia, but for the kind of person who saw the world through such a narrow lens. I didn't want it to be like this, she admitted softly. David nodded, his expression understanding. I know, but you didn't back down, and that's what matters. Isabella straightened, the weight of the evening slowly lifting. The restaurant was still hers, and so was her integrity. Let's get back to work, she said, her voice steady once more. The night pressed on at Label Maison, though the earlier tension still lingered faintly, like the last note of a fading song. Isabella returned to her role, weaving between tables with a quiet dignity, her presence a steady anchor for the restaurant. Yet behind her composed exterior, a storm brewed. The adrenaline from the confrontation had worn off, leaving behind the familiar ache of old wounds reopened. Words like the ones Olivia had wielded always struck the same chord, cutting deep but never quite severing the threads of resilience she'd spent years weaving. As the last of the diners began to leave, Isabella excused herself to the small office tucked away behind the kitchen. The room was modest, its shelves lined with binders of invoices and books on culinary techniques. A framed photograph of her parents rested on the desk, a reminder of why she'd started this journey in the first place. She sank into the worn leather chair, her finger tracing the edge of the photo frame. Her mother's warm smile and her father's steady gaze stared back at her, a grounding force even in their absence. You'd have handled it better, she murmured to the photograph, a bittersweet smile tugging at her lips. A soft knock at the door broke her reverie. Before she could answer, David stepped inside, his tall frame filling the doorway. You okay? He asked, his voice low but laced with concern. Isabella nodded, setting the photograph down. Yeah, just needed a minute. David closed the door behind him and leaned against the wall, his arms crossed. You handled tonight better than most people would have. Hell, better than I would have. Isabella chuckled softly, though there was little humor in it. It's not the first time I've dealt with someone like her. David's expression darkened. Doesn't make it right. No, it doesn't, Isabella agreed, her gaze dropping to her hands. But it's part of the job. People see what they want to see. A waitress, someone beneath them. They don't care to look deeper. Tonight, they looked deeper, David said, his tone firm. You showed them who you are, Isabella. Not just the owner of this place, but someone who doesn't back down, who demands respect. Isabella met his gaze, her expression softening. It's not about me, David. It's about everyone who's ever been treated like they don't belong, like they're not enough. I stood my ground for them. David smiled faintly, nodding. Well, you did a damn good job. The two sat in silence for a moment, the hum of the restaurant beyond the door fading into the background. Isabella reached for the cup of tea she'd left on her desk earlier, now lukewarm, and took a small sip. Do you think she'll come back? She asked quietly, her mind flickering to Olivia. David let out a low laugh. Not likely. People like her don't like to be reminded that they're not untouchable. Isabella tilted her head, her expression thoughtful. I don't want her to feel humiliated, David. I just wanted her to understand. Understand what? He asked. That her words have weight, Isabella said, her voice steady. That the way we treat people matters, no matter who we think they are. David studied her for a moment, then nodded. You're a better person than most, Isabella. She smiled faintly, though her thoughts remained heavy. The truth was, she didn't feel like the better person. Confrontations like this always left her questioning if she'd done enough or too much. As the evening drew to a close, Isabella made her way back to the dining room. The last few tables were being cleared, the clinking of glassware and the rustle of tablecloths signaling the end of another successful night. The staff moved with quiet efficiency, their respect for Isabella evident in the way they glanced at her, offering small smiles and nods. Marcus approached her as she wiped down the podium. You heading home soon? He asked, his tone casual but kind. Soon, Isabella replied, tucking a stray curl behind her ear. Just want to make sure everything's squared away. Marcus hesitated, then added, You know, the way you handled tonight, it meant something to the rest of us. Not just because you stood up to her, but because you reminded us why we're here. Isabella looked at him, surprised. Why you're here? Marcus nodded, a small smile tugging at his lips. This place isn't just a restaurant, Isabella. It's hope, for all of us who've been told we're not enough. You built this, and you make us believe we can do the same. Her throat tightened, the weight of his words settling over her like a warm blanket. Thank you, Marcus, she said softly. That means more than you know. Across town, Olivia Vanderbilt sat in the dimly lit confines of her penthouse apartment, her untouched glass of wine perched on the edge of her marble coffee table. The city lights sparkled through the floor-to-ceiling windows, but for once, their brilliance failed to distract her. She couldn't stop replaying the evening in her mind. The quiet authority in Isabella's voice, the unwavering dignity in her eyes. It all gnawed at Olivia in a way she couldn't fully understand. Her pride told her she'd been wronged, that Isabella and David had humiliated her unfairly. But a quieter, more insistent voice whispered something different, that perhaps, just perhaps, she had been the one in the wrong. For the first time in years, Olivia found herself questioning the armor she'd built around her identity, the wealth, the status, the need to be superior. She reached for her phone, her fingers hesitating over the screen. The temptation to lash out, to reclaim control of the narrative, was strong. But instead, she set the phone down and stared out at the city. For the first time in a long while, Olivia Vanderbilt felt small. Back at Label Maison, Isabella stood at the doorway as the last of the staff filed out, offering cheerful goodbyes. She locked the doors behind them, the night finally quiet. The restaurant, now empty, seemed almost sacred in its stillness, a testament to her resilience, her vision, her refusal to give up. As she turned off the lights, a small smile graced her lips. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new faces, and inevitably, new tests of patience. But tonight, Isabella Rossi had won, not just for herself, but for everyone who had ever been underestimated. The next morning, sunlight poured through the tall windows of Label Maison, illuminating the elegant dining room with a soft, golden glow. Isabella Rossi stood by one of the tables, carefully rearranging the fresh-cut flowers delivered that morning. Her movements were slow and deliberate, a quiet ritual that helped her focus before the bustle of the day began. The restaurant wasn't open yet, but the kitchen was alive with the faint clatter of pots and pans as the prep team began their work. The scent of freshly baked bread wafted through the air, mingling with the faint aroma of brewed coffee. It was Isabella's favorite time of day, the calm before the rush. But today, the calm felt different. Yesterday's confrontation lingered like an echo, intertwining with the rhythmic sounds of the restaurant. Isabella's mind wandered back to the moment she stood before Olivia Vanderbilt, feeling both the weight of the room's attention and the burden of her own restraint. A soft knock broke Isabella's thoughts. She turned toward the entrance, surprised. It was too early for deliveries or customers. Setting the vase of flowers down, she walked to the glass doors and peered outside. There on the doorstep was an envelope. No one was in sight, just the envelope resting neatly against the door frame. Isabella hesitated before unlocking the door and picking it up. The envelope was plain, with no markings save for her name written in delicate cursive. She turned it over in her hands, her curiosity piqued. Walking back to the podium, she slid her finger under the flap and unfolded the single sheet of paper inside. The letter was brief, written on thick, expensive stationery. Dear Ms. Rossi, I'm writing to express my sincerest apologies for my behavior last evening. I was disrespectful, rude, and entirely out of line. My actions were inexcusable, and I deeply regret the way I treated you and your staff. Last night gave me much to reflect upon, not only about my actions, but about the kind of person I have allowed myself to become. While words may not be enough to make amends, I wanted you to know that I am truly sorry. Respectfully, Olivia Vanderbilt. Isabella read the letter twice, her brow furrowing slightly. She wasn't sure what she had expected, if anything, but this wasn't it. Olivia's words felt raw, unpolished, as though written in a moment of genuine self-reflection. The letter stayed in Isabella's hands as she sank into a nearby chair. She read it again, slower this time, letting the words settle. The apology was unexpected, but it wasn't unwelcome. Yet a part of her couldn't help but wonder what had prompted it. People like Olivia Vanderbilt didn't usually apologize, not without motive or a public outcry to force their hand. But there had been no cameras last night, no social media frenzy to push Olivia into damage control. This seemed personal. Isabella sighed, folding the letter neatly and placing it on the table. She wasn't sure if forgiveness came as easily as words on a page. The wounds Olivia had reopened didn't close overnight, and they certainly didn't heal with a few sentences on fine stationery. Hours passed, and the restaurant opened for lunch. The midday crowd began to filter in, business professionals, couples, and friends meeting for a meal. Isabella moved through the dining room with her usual poise, greeting regulars and ensuring everything ran smoothly. Then, in the middle of the lunch rush, the glass doors swung open, and in walked a familiar figure, Olivia Vanderbilt. Isabella's heart skipped a beat, though her expression remained composed. Olivia was dressed more simply today, her designer dress replaced with a sleek blazer and trousers. She paused near the entrance, her usual air of confidence tempered with a quiet uncertainty. For a moment, Isabella considered sending one of her staff to greet her, but this wasn't a moment for intermediaries. Taking a deep breath, she walked toward Olivia, her heels clicking softly against the floor. "Ms. Vanderbilt," Isabella said, her voice calm and even. "Welcome back to Label Maison." Olivia hesitated, her hands clutching a small leather bag in front of her. "Thank you," she said quietly. Her voice lacked its usual sharpness, replaced by something softer, almost unsure. "I wasn't sure you'd let me in." Isabella tilted her head slightly. "We don't turn people away, Ms. Vanderbilt. But I am curious, what brings you back today?" Olivia glanced around the room, her gaze landing briefly on the podium where Isabella had placed the letter earlier. Her cheeks flushed slightly. "I wanted to apologize in person." The words hung in the air between them, heavy with vulnerability. Isabella studied her for a moment, weighing her response. "You already apologized in your letter," she said, her tone measured. "Why come back?" Olivia swallowed, glancing down at her hands. "Because last night, I realized something. I've spent so much of my life thinking that my money and status gave me power. But standing there, hearing you speak, I realized how small it all is. How small I am. And I hated it. Not because of you, but because of me." The honesty in her words caught Isabella off guard. She hadn't expected such raw self-awareness from Olivia, nor the humility that came with it. "I don't expect you to forgive me," Olivia continued, her voice trembling slightly. "But I needed you to know that I'm trying to change. Last night was a wake-up call." Isabella's expression softened, though her resolve remained firm. "Change doesn't happen overnight, Ms. Vanderbilt, and it certainly doesn't erase the past." "I know," Olivia said quickly. "I know, but I want to try." For a long moment, neither woman spoke. The din of the restaurant buzzed around them, but it felt like the world had narrowed to just the two of them. Finally, Isabella nodded. "Then start by treating people with the respect they deserve. Not just here, but everywhere." Olivia blinked, then nodded quickly. "I will. Thank you." Isabella offered a small, cautious smile. "Enjoy your meal, Ms. Vanderbilt." As Olivia was seated at a quiet table near the window, Isabella watched her from a distance. She wasn't sure if Olivia's words would translate into real change, but for the first time, she saw a flicker of humanity in the woman who had once seemed so untouchable. It wasn't forgiveness, not yet, but it was a start, and sometimes a start was enough. And so, the tables turned, leaving a powerful lesson behind, one that reminds us all of the importance of respect and humility, no matter how much wealth or status you may have. True value comes from how you treat others. If this story moved you or made you think, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to our channel for more inspiring stories that reveal the power of kindness, justice, and the unexpected twists life has to offer. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.